Hello and welcome to a Talmud Israeli production. Today we'll review the highlights of this week's course of Daf Yomi study, Masechet Yevamot, pages Nun Hey through Samach Aleph, 55 through 61. Nun Hey. Kinala derech evarim. Let's say a husband is suspicious of his wife's activities and thinks that she's potentially engaged in adultery, and he warns her, and this warning was intended to make her into a safek sota, a doubtful case of an adulterous woman. But he warned her not concerning real intimacy, but rather just bodily contact between her and some other man. You might have thought that that's a valid form of warning, which could lead to real consequences down the road if she were to seclude herself. Since the Torah is concerned for the husband's concerns about her bad behavior, and he's particular about this, so then it should matter. Hakakapid, he's concerned that she's engaging in bodily contact. Kamash Malon, therefore we're told that such warnings are halachically insignificant. The only thing that matters is if he warns her of intercourse. Nun Vav 56. Almana lekohen gadol grusha v'chalutza lekohen hadyot mina erisin lo yachlu truma. So if a kohen gadol were to marry an almana, or to betroth an almana, and he's not allowed to, or a regular Kohen were to betroth a grusha or chalutza, divorcee, or a woman who underwent chalitza, so these were illicit activities. Lo yachlu b'truma, the woman in question cannot eat truma because she doesn't fall under the rubric of the Kohanic household. Nit'amalu nitgarshu, minanisuin, but they haven't been disqualified from eating truma permanently necessarily. They just in the moment could not eat truma because of what they had done wrong. But let's say that they were widowed or divorced from the nisuin after a full marriage, then pesulot, they forever could never go back to eating truma, even in their father's house. Mina eris and kesheret, however, if they were out of that marriage after only erisin, and their father was a kohen, they could go back to eating their father's truma. They have not permanently been disqualified. They just had a moment when there was a disqualification, but temporary in passing. Nun Zayin. Question is, can the progeny of converts marry a kohen? And there are three halachic opinions among the Tanoim. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, bat ger zachar kebat kalal zachar, that the daughter of a male convert is like the daughter of a halal and cannot marry a kohen. That in order for a Jewish girl to marry a kohen, it must be the case that her father was a native-born Jew. Rabbi Yossi Omer av ger shnas hagiyor bitok ksher lekahuna. Rabbi Yossi says it doesn't matter who the parents are. Even if both of them were converts to Judaism, the child is allowed to marry a kohen. And the third opinion is Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov Omer, Isha bat ger l'tinas l'kunach te'imah miYisrael, that it is sufficient for either parent to be a native-born Jew, but at least one parent must be a native-born Jew in order for their offspring, the daughter, to marry a kohen. Nun chet. Asa mamar b'yevimto, divrei hakol achla. So we're talking about a scenario where the Yavam himself was a kohen, the Yavama was the daughter of a kohen, so by virtue of her father's status, she could eat truma, and potentially also by virtue of her husband, the deceased husband and future husband could be eating truma. So if the mamar was done, the rabbinical kiddushin, this girl can eat truma. Yesh lo ach halal. However, if there is a brother of her deceased husband who was a potential yavam for her, and that brother was not a valid kohen but rather was a halal, then she cannot eat truma until such time as she consummates her yibum marriage with the other yavam. Now, why is this true? Because the halal brother is just as legitimate a form of a yavam as the kohanic brother, and so until such time as the relationship has been removed completely from the halal and settled permanently on the kohanic brother, so she will not be able to eat truma because she's awaiting a potential cohabitation with a disqualifying factor. Nun tet. Kohen gadol lo yisa almana. A Kohen gadol, a high priest, cannot marry a widow. Ben almana mina erusin, ben almana mina nisuin. It doesn't matter at what stage she became a widow, whether after betrothal only or after a full-fledged marriage. She cannot marry a Kohen gadol. V'lo yisa bogeret, and a Kohen gadol is not supposed to marry a bogeret, meaning a girl over the age of 12 and a half. Why? Because her betulim, her virgin status, is not completely intact. Whereas Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon Machshir Bogeres, Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon allow the Kohen Gadol to marry a Bogeret because as long as there's partial betulim, that is sufficient. And a Kohen Gadol should not marry a girl whose virgin status was compromised not by a sexual act, but by being hit by a stick, by a physical injury. Samach. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai Omer, so Shimon Bar Yochai says that a woman who converted to Judaism below the age of 3 years and 1 day is not going to be stigmatized with the status of a zona, and therefore she could be married off to a Kohen. However, this was done in practice in the Amoraic period, and the Gemara concludes by saying that the person who did this and married a Kohen who married a girl who converted below the age of 3 was given a warning: you must divorce this wife, and if not, you'll suffer severe consequences. So the halacha is that regardless of the age at which the woman converts to Judaism, she's off limits to the Kohen. Samech Aleph 61. Ireis eta almana. What happens if a person was a Kohen who's allowed to marry a widow, not a divorcee, but a widow, lawfully marry a widow, and erusin was done between this regular Kohen Hedyot and this almanah, this widow, and then before the opportunity presented itself for there to be a chuppah, a nisuin, a consummation of the marriage, this Kohen was appointed to be the high priest, to be the Kohen Gadol. So now the question is, fine, he's the high priest, but can he fully marry this girl with whom he had betrothal? And the Mishnah says, Yichnos, he's allowed to marry her. Why? So the Gemara says, Tamalomar yikach isha, that the prohibition is on lekicha, on the taking, which is the betrothal aspect of things. That a girl who was fully single and not yet betrothed cannot become betrothed to a Kohen Gadol. But a girl who already was betrothed and is just waiting chuppah of an nisuin, that person can marry her husband, who happens to now be a Kohen Gadol. Everyone have a great week.